Jonam Chantu Padu Dani Kapsuchi, Jagi Chenin Gi Petokam, Jolam Panju Sange Tupan, Sange Chodang Suki Chonam, Chantu Padu Dani Kapsuchi, Jagi Chenin Gi Petokam, Jolam Panju Sange Tupan,
Sange Chodang Suki
Chonam Chantu Padu Dani Kapsuchi. Jagi Chenin Gi Petokam, Jolam Panju Sange Tupan,
Tayata, Gate
Para Samjate Gadi Saha.
Tayata,
Tayata Gate Para Samjate Gadi Saha.
Tayanta,
Gate Para Samjate Gadi Saha.
올라서 심지어 탐제가 도도 딱까지 심지어 탐제도 저거 산재 공부를 못 치는 이제 또 봤자 뒤에서는 그 잔주서 말랍잖아 출신은 나와래 심벌을 토를 투지쇼 만나와 가지고 안가서 바바디 계세지 뭐 시와서 주주고 때는 대신 친구님이 상담체.
So we begin by setting our motivation to do whatever we possibly can to attain the fearless state of enlightenment in order to benefit all living beings, knowing that to attain such a state, I must perfect all the trainings on the Bodhisattva path. To do that in turn, I must have a good understanding of it. And to gain that understanding, I must be able to rely on a non-mistaken source. So it is with this in mind that I'm here to listen to a teaching from the Bodhisattva's way of life today. So as usual, also we begin by visualizing the space in front of us, the figure of Shakyamuni Buddha, who is in actuality our own guru, the figure of the one who is skillful in means, greatly compassionate, the Shakyamuni Buddha, who has one face and two hands. And in the space all around us are all kind, mother sentient beings without exception.
And then and Chivo on Demba Tuga Homes, you sum set up, and Tuga Hole, and Nicoso, you said part of Meba Trend, and a church, Shingram Jan never, Ishiba, only the Chaba Gentana, Ishiba, Rangi Combative, and Lama Tuga, number Gentana, Tim, and Chile, Uncle, and Mikiva, Chula, never Mikiva, which wanted to combat.
And that the figure of Shakyamuni Buddha is marked at the crown by an Om, at the throat by an A, and at the heart by a Hong syllable. From the Hong syllable at the heart, the countless rays of light emanate, going out into the pure realms and inviting back the wisdom beings and the empowering deities from these natural abodes. And when they return, the wisdom beings dissolve into the central figure, and the empowering deities confer the nectar of empowerment, which overflows at the crown, simultaneously producing the figure of Akshobhya.
What it is, I don't do said that, and the Lama to be on Buddha, and never Shiva was shown, but Takaja, Chigunatana, to be on Boranga to the Shuyu, something in Nangala, was for a Shuyu, some such a what in the
So it is important to really see this happening for real in front, to as much as we possibly can, that the wisdom beings are really dissolving into the central figure of Shakyamuni Buddha in the space in front of us, and that really empowers that figure. So that we can be confident that where it's said that wherever we can hope to have the Buddha present, and there the Buddha will be present. And so in this, in our aspiration to visualize this, we can be sure that the Buddha is actually there.
Lama to be on the Kusung to go yonder to get the 10. Rodaka, go yonder, Sungo yonder, Tugo yonder, Tilega yonder, and Raji Batam Java, Shanti Batava Tabla, Kula Tejimon, you remember Juba, Penta Mata, Tamja, Dembege, and Kusung to go yonder, part 10. And Tani Semjago to 2 kid. Lamla Lama, Mobazoba Sanji, Narazu to the 2 kid, Narazu to the Lamla, Narazu to the Mobazoba Sanji. What is it? Oh, compassion.
So then we start to reflect on what the qualities of an enlightened being are, considering the qualities of the Buddha's body, speech, mind, enlightened activities, the fact that the Buddha is unafraid of any sense of fear, any sense of suffering with regard to themselves. Is has no fear, showing the ability to relieve the suffering of others. He's working with great compassion with the mind, which is showing no bias towards other sentient beings, and works to benefit others, regardless of whether any benefit comes back from them to him at all. And also, we kind of recall these kinds of qualifications, of qualities of an enlightened being that the Buddha has. Prior to enlightenment, developed that mind of enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, then trained on the path with that same motivation, and finally attained full and complete enlightenment for the benefit of sentient beings as well. And we have to remember and recall that this is including us, that the Buddha did develop that mind of enlightenment for us, and trained on the path for our sake, developed full and complete enlightenment for our sake also.
어디를 전딱 어디를 공부하시는 딱 앉아 지고서 랑게 뛰는 내배 어느 때에 고송두고 유인데 어디 대심에 가는 어디에서 공부하시 어느 랑게 타고 되면 선제 탐색에 어느 지가서데 되게 어느 지금 어느 동에게 나출라 삼로때네 동에게 나출라 삼로다네 어느 코아치다 제다가 동에 나출 되게 삼로다네 어느 대달 베베 이제 동에도 전에 찜으로 저와 규제 동에 규제 저와 전에 찜으로 저와 규제 저와 휴제 저와 다른 지에서 어느 대다 탐제 어느 랑게 타고 녀 선제 탐제 어느 대화도 대외 규제 때 맞을 때는 찜으로 대화 규제 대화 쇼차 대화 다른 지에 어느 대대 그래서 어떤 데 지금 하다 어느 대대게 어떤 데 공부하시네 어느 다 대대 지금 다 세메시가 삼로다네 아니 대답 네 지금 스파 제가 저다 심지어 탐자셔는 심지어 지기야 대화 탐자 동네 탐자들 저와 체마도 임바 인사 안 대답 제대로 네바도 수도 도스나 아니 랑게 되나 세대베 심지어도 투자 람라 공부서 다 폰도 아니 공기 공부하지 마도는 탐마도 대 공부하지 타봐 이만나 끼지 레레네 규민모바 규마미바 미바지 미바 저도에 된데도 가서는 되게 감다 삼마 발라냐와 지다 와시도 계획이 요바에서 낭제 가린 나와 있는 심지가 돌아 마주가 민도 다들 내 인사 공기 공부하지 마도 타면도 두바 치리 삼삼차
So it's important to kind of recall in this way, to remind ourselves and to have a kind of freshen our appreciation of the qualities of enlightenment as we have just done. And then we recall that we are surrounded by all kinds of other sentient beings, and they are undergoing a whole variety of sufferings relative to whatever realm they are in. And so these feelings of compassion arise here. We think how wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were free of suffering and the cause of suffering. May that be the case. I will see to it that it is the case. How wonderful if all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May it be the case. I will see to it that it is the case. We start to really focus on that capacity that we ourselves have, develop that courage of mind to gain that kind of exalted attitude of definitely, I must do something, I will do something to benefit sentient beings, to on the one hand, relieve them of their suffering and to place them into happiness on the other hand. But of course, when I look around to do that, I realize how limited I am. But when I see what kind of state of mind can do that, I focus on the enlightened state, the state of a Buddha, because from that point of view, they have developed that mind of enlightenment. They have trained on the path to finesse that mind of enlightenment, and then on the basis of that, attain full and complete enlightenment. So it's not only the result, but they have gone through all of the different necessary causes to bring that about. And so therefore, they have that capacity to recognize the suffering of others, what needs to be done to ripen their minds, to kind of relieve that suffering. They have access to the individual dispositions and personalities and karmas of sentient beings, so they can precisely prescribe what needs to be done to be able to help them overcome their suffering and so on. And so therefore, I realized that without any doubt, I must attain that state of enlightenment. There is no choice. If I really want to benefit sentient beings, I must attain that state of enlightenment in order to benefit all. And so with that in mind, I'm realizing that, that there's no choice but to really attain a state of enlightenment in order to perfectly, properly benefit sentient beings. And so therefore, I dedicate myself to the attainment of that state of enlightenment for that very purpose, just to kind of refresh that in my mind, that is the cause, that is the reason why I'm here, listening to a teaching from, in fact, how a bodhisattva needs to go about their life in order to fulfill that goal. Sokrang di uju gopshi and tonere tambodi nyomongi jokchawa irungwa kimsen.
Nyomola soba komiripa sidre.
Mari di tik tambodi sokrang uju gopshi nyomongi jokcha irungwa kimsen. Zawale. Tunba rimdro dencha menchena tamje pentan de.
Oh yeah, oh jalas. Siwa nyomogi jocha miro. Nyomogi jocha miro kimse. Olas. Hola, sudah. Tak siapa nyomong ke cami rumah tak kan je nyomong ke sedap kan je. Dan arah juga jadi yo bayi na jadi nyomong cada lo siang suka mare. Tadi ni yang bayi so nyomong ke ongki, ane rang tak kan je cedele ni magi ba. Ane cima penjali ni ane tunga patu ni ber ane lute ke cucu dia. Ane tar ane kasur tak kan je mutu no kuala ni tu ni koi ni ane koi ceda ceda tunga na soba nyomong cigi yore. Nyomong ke pen tawa cawan ni ma nyoba pasir ba. Dende inza ane dende nyoba pasir kegen ke jadi ma ngusin ane telar ane pesam ta nyobu che yomares. Jocha miro jumsen ne cawan tumba rimtu denjena tamja penda denjena nyomong namne denjena chichir kasa chichin 동에 nyoba chesha.
So we'll be looking at the faults of mental affliction, the set of outlines, and how there is no real saving grace to mental affliction. They create misery for us in this life. They project us into negative future lives, and ultimately they guarantee no liberation from suffering. So it's kind of like really a case of really identifying and being able to constantly perceive mental affliction as the enemy, that which must be overcome, eradicated, destroyed. And here, this particular outline is saying the reasoning why it is improper to make a friend of mental affliction. Verse number 33. If I agreeably honor and entrust myself to others, they will bring me benefit and happiness. But if I entrust myself to these disturbing conceptions, in future they will bring only misery and harm.
and Jabu Korangi, Tamea Jabuti, Korangi, and Deva Yobata, Koral Pembachi to be enough. Yanko Dadi Niela Julia Jorba. Dadi Niela Julia, Yan Sosola Munetana, Soso Getch, she was singing it. Niela Sosola, no, Neg Solomon Yoma there, Yina, Munetana, Koran Pembachi, Pemba got that Koran Gobe Duty was a Pandora chair, Roba chair, and sometimes Yabuchena. Nobody can tell the social pembe near so chai to Yorba. In a duck at the Yomo, tell the Yomar super, Yomo, you must Chidebeta, Tala Deta Tumbas, Koranda Tumbachan, Rimdo, Pembachi to be enough. Debachena, that Tamja ran last, Pembata Devate, whatever he knows. I did Javalatene, and social Laguna Dane, Jig, Semda Nebuchane, and Jig Caso, that social Pemba to Genji Chai, wherever you take it. In a email that Duxumeta, Doja, Shedan, Condros, Nomumbe Tatilla, and Namne, part them, but in a park as a Caso de that Jig Caso de Collar, Chicaso Nembo Madenchen, and Korang la Korang Deva Chevayina. And Tula Carriage, Sula Dumenge, that Dujigas, Duming Nova Chevas, that Duming Juchen. And never chebe, no that draw mirum shabosta, no more sigida, caso da tachido, takajo, chicaso de takaja, caso da rangin nubala pabeata, draw that casa draw my jig that tab denguris, dodge mirum shabocha.
So this verse is looking at the idea of, say you have an ordinary enemy, common enemy that we have in this world, so we have kind of negative relations with them, but we can see how it is possible there to change that situation by being beneficial towards them, friendly, respectful, and so on. This kind of feeling that we have towards each other can change, and can change in quite dramatic sense in some cases, where they become a friend or a very good friend, where they can be very beneficial to us and bring us lots of happiness. And so this is something that maybe we have experienced, but we can see it's very possible with this kind of friend. However, when we talk about mental affliction, so we're talking about here the three poisonous attitudes, attachment, aversion, ignorance, and so on, the different mental afflictions. If we try to in some way accommodate them, befriend them, and so on, that would be kind of completely and utterly wrong. That would be a really stupid decision, because they will only bring us suffering. So that however much we try to compromise with our mental afflictions, they will only in the future bring about more misery and harm. And therefore, the conclusion is that it is completely inappropriate that we befriend in any sense our mental afflictions.
아니 먼저 내 맞이는 차기로 너무 잡아도 먼저 코랑라 대바 여바 제바이는 먼저 내 망하기도 와. 좋아. 너무 대바 여바지 제바이나 먼저 내 망하기도 와. 좋아. 타메가 잡을라 코랑게 되와 매바지 제바 있는 것도 몇 개기도 와. 몇 개기도 와. 다 너무 잡어대 코랑라 되와 여바지 제나 몇 개기도 와. 그 지단 또 로가리도 와. 지단 로가리도 와. 다 너무 봐달라 수 안에 가서데 내가 깨고도 못 쳐봤지. 안에 코랑게 되와 코랑게 되와 매바지 콜라 다 가서다. 가서다 opposition 소리 전 내가 매번 지하면도 안 거쇼 중도 저거도 와. 타메 잡아 내가 팔아 거 내가 매번 지하면도 거야 숙체도 줘서 줘라. 그 존내가 망하게 해서 그 내가 내다 또 로가래도 와. 그래서요. 그 내가 내다 로가래도 와.
So we can see too how, when we look at this example of the ordinary enemy versus the enemy of mental affliction, we can see that things work rather conversely, in that when we say do not support what another wants, that often then causes them to arise as the one we dislike or the enemy, say, for easy reasons, that they become the enemy, so that because what they want is not fulfilled, we are kind of in some way an obstacle to fulfilling a desire of theirs. And then on the opposite end, when we fulfill a desire of theirs, that can change the relationship, so that enemy can become more friendly or indeed a friend. On the other hand, when we talk about mental affliction, when we support a mental affliction, that only leads to kind of more suffering for us. They kind of really are kind of this subversive, the enemy, because we have supported that side. And on the other hand, when we show opposition to the mental affliction, and by applying antidotes, for example, that can reduce the influence of their harm on us, and indeed wipe it out. So it can change the relationship. So you can see there's a kind of like almost an opposite kind of response in relation to whether one is dealing with a common ordinary enemy versus the enemy of the mental afflictions.
어디를 안 다가는 생게 타메 잡고데 소소 삼로 당당의 찍다나 수 내봐 잡아데 안에 편바 주에 줄을 줘야지도 와. 배는 지금 쇠배 편유다 되도 통해서는 수 내봐 잡아데 안에 소소게 소바게 냠내를 비주 당했도 와. 통제 좋아 중국도 와. 내봐데 너무 그때 다 뒤요 말이야. 다 연구요 말. 다 되네 임바인자 되네 임바인자 다 가자 지금 간제 녀모라 아니 가제게 지금 가서도 다그 샤와수라 다 콜라랑와 때바이나 디게스게 랑게 추투벨에 개겐제제지 개겐제제다 아니 모두네 아니 동해 유튜브 대중도 와 어떤데 지금 셰베 토네 다 간제 저 녀모디 아니 가서도 다 간제 지금 다 딜러 저 머리스데 디 샤와도 땅 리그 말에 수고를 왔다 셰모저 미나시 조고 제스케 저 말와 다디 코랑게 라바네시 녀몽게 가서 람때만네시 아니 딜러 조주요 말레스 디 칼마니 바체도 조마치 바스케 저와 다도 로마치 바소치 어떤지 고고지로 어떤지 셰보고 어다 디게 녀몽고 껴 디게 차상와 쳔바이나 아니 거지 라렌타에라 또스 레라도 저거와 이나 당가라도 공배 온게 남장 라렌 뿌다고 따야다 커버리데 이나양 강투도 배제체 남시나 아니 숙충도 충도는 아니 남들 레라비토네 아니 가소다다 너무 온도 두두와 정부로와.
Another difference between the common or worldly enemy and the enemy of the mental affliction is that that in fact when we are experiencing the harm from such a common enemy, that it depends on our own thinking process as to how that the harm is evaluated. So, for example, if we are able to use our practice of patience at that time, such harm is going to be a great a benefit to us, an advantage to us being able to refine our practice of patience and enhance our spiritual practice in general. So, in fact, the actions of an enemy can be very beneficial to our own spiritual development. However, with the mental afflictions, there is no such opportunity that, in all instances, when we are under the influence of mental affliction, that this is going to lead to a constant suffering and a constant accumulation of the causes of future suffering. And so we must be clear on that. There can be no accommodation with a mental affliction. There's nothing to be gained in that sense. That when we talk about, this, the outline here is talking about not befriending mental affliction. What it's really saying is, do not allow yourself to fall under the influence of mental affliction. Don't become overpowered by mental affliction. And so it's kind of like, don't listen to the afflictive voice in your mind. And so we have to be aware of this. We have to kind of like, on the one hand, be mindful of what's going on internally, and then secondly, we use whatever ability we have to apply antidotes, to apply an opposition to that afflictive voice. And that, of course, it is very difficult for us to do this at the outset, because not because of anything inherently powerful in the mental affliction, but mostly due to just the power of habituation. This is the way we've been so used to thinking. And so we must persevere. Consistency of effort is very important. And then at one time, you will find that it becomes easier to bypass the afflictive thinking, the afflictive voice in the mind, and to kind of like really reduce the power of mental affliction, leading to approaching and kind of leading to ultimately eradicating the influence of mental affliction altogether.
我觉得这他感觉这녀모 원도 조사도 녀모 숙성모 원도 조사도 아니 남자 합대 자스 가보래 다 개치시도 녀모 의견 되게 시 아니 녀모게 원도 마주에게 지가서도 깬다 채원도 다 sabsa 마잖아 녀모 개그래 삼삼게 아니 가서다 다 점바데 시신게 주에 되다 개치 못 찾아 다 녀모 거랑 원도 조사도 때 모두 내당벌 또 가보요래 다 너무 원도 마주 이게 다 거치 깬다 채원도 아니 당게 sabsa 마잖아 녀모 개그래 녀모 개와나 라시 니가를 내가 지금 주주그래 삼삼게 와다 디 삼로다나 전세가 돈에 녀모 다가서도 당보다 개그래 깬다 채원바 깬디게도 못 쳐봤잖아 아니 sabsa 마잖아 다 녀모 개온 거래 삼삼잖아 뭐도 좋은 거래 삼삼 녀모 치다도 예어로 와 말아서 내당벌 이내야 다 뭐도 좀 마주 왔잖아 뭐도 좀 마주 와게 탑시 지혜지 뭐도 주바이네 숙서부 좀 마도 되는 용거로 왔다 간제 와도 내가 탑 개봤잖아 다 간제 저 그래 다탑 개봤잖아 다 숙서부 뭐도 마주야 탑시 지혜다 개치시 차지기도 다 녀모 뭐도 교사도 아니 민녀바 자살해 미야고 쉬울 때 내가 아니 골로쳐보 쉬울 때 개와 용거도 와 근데 그 미상부래 미약부래 쓰는지는 얘네 보라 녀모 숙서부 뭐도 좋은데 아니 미디가 두자 가리네 제세 가리네 제시에 정도도 그 녀몽어도 조사도 거다 저 거를 라와 매버 찾아라 다 라와 매버 맞아 라와 예배 가면 다 지금 다 되게 좀라 안 되죠 그 녀몽이 그치그래 녀몽이 전개 작으래 녀몽어도 주에 전개 작으래서 되게도 거쳐বে 하고 배다는 아니 마제베 탑시다 깨바이네 아니 숙충조도 매버 쏟아 제치 대입자 다다 바유가 lưu 거에 되라 바유 생다 바다 대바 지구래 생다
So Of course, when the mental affliction has arisen and is quite powerful in the mind, it's very difficult to engage in any opposition at that point. And so it's very, very important then that we do sort of the necessary preliminary reflection on what the fault of mental affliction is, for example, really understand what is so insidious about mental affliction, and to kind of like be primed with our mindfulness and alertness as to when the kind of that small disturbance begins in the mind, to understand that, I had better be very, very careful here. This is could well lead to a display of very powerful mental affliction. So that's the point at which you must act and apply antidotes, apply and whatever opposition you can, because when we meet with the conditions, then very quickly things can flare up in the mind. So we have to be very, very careful and understand that if mental affliction is already present, and it means very likely that it's going to be harmful to both myself and others. So I have to take all that into account. And so it's prior to mental affliction becoming that manifest that the difficult work needs to be done. And this requires that that knowledge of how faulty mental affliction is, and then the mindfulness and alertness to be kind of aware that when the mind is becoming disturbed into mental affliction. So it's very important. And so it's kind of like, again, if mental afflictions have arisen, even in a person who is normally a very good, kind human being, you can see how, because they have now no longer control over what's going on, they can engage in very destructive acts. And that, it can be very shocking to other people who know that person. Say, oh, they're so calm, so relaxed, so good, a good person. Yet, when the mental affliction takes over, it shows that can become quite a monster. And so it's for us, our point of view, to be able to recognize the danger of a mental affliction, to understand how nothing good can come out of allowing a mental affliction kind of power in any instance. So we got to be strategic in being able to spot whenever the mind is becoming a little bit disturbed, and immediately employ the antidotes at that point in order to reduce as much as we can at all costs and at all times the power of mental affliction.
Rotila nyomon ke yo marwa. Ta sombotila nyomon ke sona ane karine chesigirwa. Mune je sheko na misombotila sheko des. Misombotila nyamdo dena. Ane ko nyomon ke na karine chesigirwa. Ina ro diga pungure sada doda chikbare kaya so neba ke yo marwa. Chikna tima dos kagire ba she kaya ba. Ina yang azu shedro rol to shigire mi ko shigis marwa. Ina miti nyomon kena kaina chesigirwa. Kaina chesigirwa. Wata dire ta nyomon kyorwa tiga.
Again, from this same text, the Bodhisattva's way of life, and it's the verse which points out that, if you're in a house with a corpse, many people are scared to enter that house to be with that corpse, but there's absolutely no reason. This is a lifeless hulk now. There may be some, unpleasant smell, but that's all. There's nothing to be scared of in that situation. But if you're right next to a live human being, that could be very scary, because if a mental affliction takes over, they can do anything. And so it's like pointing out the contrast about what we should be apprehensive or anxious about, and what doesn't need us to be apprehensive or anxious at all. So it's kind of like mental affliction is where we should place our fears, because if we're with another human being and they are taken over by mental affliction, anything is possible.
Party does not class, give drop another, give with the Naminasa, give with the get a shed on chick, Namju Tendanchik, sick bedroom Tendanchik, and the condos on the Sedi Tawata, to the Shungudu. The Nomo Jangudua. The Nomo Jangudua.
So, you know, you start situations where there's a party going on, you know, with all your familiar friends, people, family, there's everybody's having a good time, and yet, you know, they're just by one kind of statement, one word, one even expression that can change things kind of almost immediately, and the party turns into a riot of anger because the mental affliction has taken over. This is kind of very obvious.
Now Mondas see Yabu Pejutan and so young Gualoga Jagua, Nomo Gujene, Gualoga Jani Udua. Nomo Jigidua.
Well, you can see the kind of prevalence of mental affliction when people are talking together, you know, that somebody may use negative language, insulting language, and then you take it personally, and then they get extremely angry, allow mental affliction to arise because of that. But you know, there's nothing dangerous about the language they're using. There's nothing essentially hurtful about the language they're using. It only when you interpreted it as such, and your mental affliction interpreted it in this way. So and then you've allowed the mental affliction to arise. And in other cases, you know, you may be actually, you know, speaking beautiful language, complimentary talk, peaceful language, but due to mental affliction, the recipient of your language is misinterpreting what you say or misunderstanding what you say, and they get offended, even though there's no intention there at all. And so you can see how, you know, mental affliction is so prevalent, is so kind of like insidious in our thinking.
Sangye Chomden Dela, and it's Caso de Chubapu, and a Chubachu, Tende Chicken Down, and a Sanjela Kuata Casa de Sanjela Nova Caricheva in there. Sanje one, Daniel Chabaka Yomari. In a Gaza Sosomona and a Chico Solom Saga, Chicken Yavasaga Yorma. In a Sanje when a Chava Sanje Gila Yomo Meva Insa, and Chabaka Yomarwa.
So another example is to take the figure of Buddha. So you have like people who are making powerful, pure offerings to the Buddha on the one hand, and then on the other hand, you have those who are harming, trying to harm the Buddha. You can see from the Buddha's point of view, there is no reaction, you know, either way, because there is no mental affliction there. For the person who is making the offerings, of course, they will generate very powerful positive merit. For the ones who are engaging in harm, they will create negativity laid down on their mind state. But from the Buddha's point of view, it's all, you know, irrelevant because the Buddha has no mental affliction.
What did it? Don't consider Tigger. Also, Nomu Kiamaje, and they Kawachi, and ya, Sem Kimaje Yungudua. Nomo Shukshons again, I asked them Dezam Kangayovan Dezanga, Nomo Shukshamu, and some Hajang, and Nima go at the chair, Kalas and a draw making to the young hair. And Dinga 삼로 당조가 돈을 용 되겠지. 누가다 근데 인자 삼로 당조가 돈을 용은 게 최종게 안 셈마기와 최종지 용 되기도 알아서 지금 용의 돈을 삼로 당을 용 되지래. 뭐 되지와.
So this is something that we can recognize for ourselves from our own experience. The extent to which our minds are dominated or not dominated by mental affliction is almost directly related to how unhappy or happy we can be, and that we can see from the point of view of a mind free of mental affliction, there's more peace of mind, more likelihood that one will be able to enjoy the experiences of life. Whereas where our minds are more dominated by afflictive thinking, it can bring unhappiness even in a situation where we ought to be happy. It also can affect our sleep, it can affect our appetite, it can just affect our whole way of thinking, and we notice ourselves from our own experience.
다른 것은 직전 취재도는 삼로단에 하고도 직전 취재도는 미치게 말을 구샵 지그리에 산다 구샵을 레와카와이나 아니 구샵 맞지나 수서 셈마지바 차지야 셈마지바 차지야 레와 마바나 구샵 제나 맞지나 가야 개와 매되겠지 저딱 소속에 너무 온거 소고도 아니 소속에 레와지카 착섬으로 왔다디 아니 구샵지에 야나 초바 프로그램 삼사 아니 델레지 레와치카 아니 레와데 칸에 아니 레와카와네체 아니 미디게디 마제바이나 아니 소세 마제바 차이다다 어디 용데지 용데 가르쳐서나 미디게 구샵 마제바다 미디게 초바 마비와 델라다 용고에 말에 소수게 착배 온게 구샵라 착바 야나 초바라 착바 디 온게 용데기도 와 근데 초바 마비와 때는 용게나 초바 마비가 먹을 강갈 때는 용고 디 말에 구샤 마지가 심바 강갈 되는 연구야 말 소설 라와 요건 되라 아니 용은 되기도 와. 그 장배 온게. 바 금세 충주 삶을 담아 있네.
So we can see how the mental afflictive minds play out very clearly in the 8 worldly concerns. For example, the one with where one is expecting respect, but then no respect is forthcoming. And therefore we feel the pinch of that disrespect, and that is a mental affliction that arises due to when we have this expectation of how things should be. I ought to be getting respect. Then when you have that expectation and then that expectation is not fulfilled, then there is kind of like a dislike of that. There's a mental affliction here. And so it's kind of very important that we see all of this, and it's kind of based on attachment, or attachment to receiving offerings or the receiving of respect. And so it's kind of like the non-respect and the non-offering is not the issue here. It's the fact that our expectations have not been met. It's the mental affliction that's causing the disturbance in the mind. And so you can see how it plays out in a situation like this. The not receiving any respect or not receiving any offerings is not the reason for the discontent. It's the fault is firmly, squarely placed on the mental affliction, attachment to those things.
어디를 용도 다 되네 임바에서 녀몽 쓰게 소돌아 내가 봐시 아니 되네 녀몽 뒤 온게 아니 레니바 나서바지 싸운 것도 봐. 녀몽 되게 아니 온게 아니 레니바 되게 사에게 아니 고디 체험도 봐. 어디 체험도 다 녀몽 되게 맞잖아. 응어도 좀 맞아 봐이나 아니 레니바 사에 고디가 돼 켈도 봐. 켈도 봐. 어디래.
So therefore, mental affliction means solely harm, and that it's by actions generated with the motivations of mental affliction lead to only negative karmas, which of course will only result in suffering.
그래서 동해 중원도 최주백이 동해 중화디 최주백 객제 두고 말해 동해 중화디 최주백 천계를 배주 당도에 용도 얘네야 녀모 제한테 녀모한테 쳐주베 통계를 배주당 두고도 녀모한테 다 뭔가 제한 것도 와 리본 것도 와 쳐주베를 개문에 되지기도 와 녀모게 동해되게 쳐주베 통계를 도와만 거요래 소지 배주당시나 가서다 다라 녀모가 생활도 도나 아니 녀모다 디기 가르쳐 안에 쳐주베 통계를 배주당 두고 말해 동해다 대화 가르쳐네 다 가서 녀모도 좀 아니 동해다 대화니까 출입에 천재를 배주 당두고도 와. 또 녀모가 강감 고가기도 와.
So that when suffering arises, this is how do you say, not necessarily a problem. The main problem. The problem is the mental affliction that motivated the action, that laid down the causes for that suffering to arise. That's where the issue is. In fact, when we meet with suffering and are able to accept that suffering, it can become a cause for us to enhance our spiritual practice. It can be a profit, a benefit to us. So it's not the issue is not suffering in self. The issue is what caused that suffering, and that's the mental affliction. And to understand that, mental affliction is that which clouds our judgment, clouds our mind. It's an ignorance that pushes us into the negative action. That's what we mean by falling under the influence of mental affliction. That it's kind of like mental affliction is now in the driving seat of what's going to happen next. And so that's where we need to act on, that it can only bring suffering, and it can destroy happiness, and it then exacerbates suffering.
What did the channel? That because 녀모 다 조자미로서 다 녀모 생각때 가끔 바시 바다 겨 바시 바다 가자 샤바게 가서데 디게 주나 동네 주나 코알 디게 나 쳐주베 튕겨를 배주 당도도 녀모 디게 쳐주베 튕겨를 배주 당도도 뭐 쳐주베 개kem 바시래 근데 임바 인사 아니 딜라다 튕겨 잠 미루와래 미루와래 what is what did the
But in conclusion, to understand that a mental affliction has no redeeming qualities. It can only act as a problem, as an obstacle to us. It can only lead to harm and suffering and misery. And that other aspects, other elements, be they common enemies, be they even suffering or other elements of our lives, can have can be the cause of happiness or suffering. There's kind of wriggle room in our encounters in those situations, that depending on how our mentality is, we can experience transform those situations. But with mental affliction, no, there is no redeeming quality. Therefore, it is completely inappropriate to befriend mental affliction in any way.
Was bena jujunala dungela yende yoles dungela ani kasada ani dungeshen nawale taka dungela ani 지금 가서는 다 간자 저게 년중 계야다 되게 용거도 왜 수도 왔던데 요나 다 녀모가 용거 맞다 녀모 그때 생활 중 남주 당금도 남주 당금도 로안 동네데 아 최주배 전결에 배주 당와라 남주시 거기도 다 녀모 계속 남주문도 남주문도 왔다 되네 다 되네 이마 인저 녀모데 아니 다 간자 저 가서라 다 딜라 아니 저 가서다 다 dying but the water that pemba kayo marsta never bashi janjares what is that niba the day is a normal soba coverage mares medical ni tell no similar never check it and lula never chema saba watch.
So therefore, when we talk about mental affliction, we talk about suffering, for example, it can have, as in we will see in this very text in the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, where Master Shantideva talks about, even suffering has some good qualities. In that, one, it can really prompt us to reflect on renunciation, because we want to, get out of this state of suffering. That's only one aspect of its benefits. But with mental affliction, it hasn't any other redeeming qualities. That's what this verse is really pointing out, that it has nothing good to say about it whatsoever. That because it kind of steals our intelligence. When we're under the influence of mental affliction, we're acting outside of that which really distinguishes us, our intelligence, to be able to make decisions based on reasoning that lead to happiness, that lead to non-harm. But when under the influence of mental affliction, we're kind of devoid of that. That steals our capacity for decent decision making. So therefore, we cannot make a friend of mental affliction. This is hammered home in the next outline, where it talks about how it is completely illogical to be patient with mental affliction. And this has two subheadings. One is because mental affliction is that which harms the mind, and mental affliction is that which harms the body.
That's similar to what you Data Yuri, Juja, Trajoba, Neva, Sora, Pue, Jujibo, Daji, Nila, Nature, Koa, Kasara, Koye, Chigman, Kawakala Jubs. So
the first of these is how it harms the mind, our mental attitude. Verse number 34 says, while in cyclic existence, how can I be joyful and unafraid if in my heart I readily prepare a place for this incessant enemy of long duration, the sole cause for the increase of all that harms me?
What did it? That did it. That did it. That Nomo data Rosata, because of the using what Toma Mevania and Kinchasupe, Mutune, and Tarjuba. Yes, Tarjuba, Rala Neva Talk, Tamja, Rado patient, that Rala Neke, Swat Tamja, Takaja, and Ya compared to Tangan, period. Kuchibu. That D only yon take Euro, Chibu, Daji Nila nearby nature, so the new but the danger was then. Nena, that then judge never enough, that Nena, Koya Jiba Mevata, Koala, that Jiba Mevata, Yikawa Kalajugas, Mijuro Shabosa.
So here is saying here, when we kind of like how or tolerate our mental affliction, that which has been for so long without beginning an incessant enemy for us, that which is the sole cause of the whole pile of harm that befalls us. And yet in our hearts, we, as it says here, we prepare a place for such an enemy. Then is asked the question, if that is the case, how can you be happy and unafraid in cyclic existence? It is an impossibility.
But I'm also Zamboling Chopsy Netanda Mankuja Samotanda. And it's because of the Pena Tanyama Tambo gave you the Lusurita, and it gave and Tambo gave Yabu and Kaza Soda, Yang, D. Cuba Dito, Yang Doses, Chicasoleta, Kaja, Missile, Chicaso that Shukshambo Dueta, and it's a Shukshambo that the Negi Chanaya, can get Chete, no more Yorba, and then the Nea Miman and a yard is all that did Jigamidus. Oh, the legend of the Jigamidus, a Koran to Chashi Yabuch Chawan. Yeah, Chile some Genesis, Koran on that to the Yachiware, because no more Yosado, no more la Captain Chani, any Pamba Matuana, and Rala on that June, and a Chig 20 years sound, yeah, no more dead there on the no more only nobody on the door. Ramen or summertime you never any channel that you never get it on the door. Tapaja looks to some book country, Yahweh Tim Yahweh country, you may in a no more like Captain Chamato, Catu in a to make you in Barota. To make you in Barota. What's that? 这个罗本来就我这本来你嘛当部给予的路，那等下真的，大家等下就是忙着当，大家等下就马上当，这个嘛不是这个么多上的养活这上面肯定用不了吧？因为呀，一个两的，那说了王家中，车上中啥的，鸟么了看的马家的，那们现在呀刚才这样多，这个鸟么这样过有，当过古龙养过有，什么养过有，明码了判断这什么有的，别个刚才这把的嘞。没说呗，人家搞了个这么要的，因为牛毛了看不得马家的，然后那个了我家种的也就不这样的对吧？
So we can see too how how pervasive mental affliction operates within worldly affairs. And so, like looking at all the different kinds of political systems we've ever had, from ancient tribal kingdoms and so on. Somebody is able to seize power. There's kind of relative peace for a while, but then ultimately war breaks out, conflict breaks out with neighboring kingdoms and so on, and the whole thing falls apart. Again and again and again, history is replete with situations like that, and that it's never kind of identified that really at the heart of these conflicts, of these downfalls, has been mental affliction all the time. And then we get other systems, communism or democracies even, and all different kinds of political ideologies that may have begun with decent motivations and maybe some measure of compassion to try and benefit the people, as it were. But once power is seized, then mental affliction seems to take over, and again these kind of power systems become more and more corrupt and untenable and harmful. And at the heart of it is mental affliction, again and again and again. When the problems are met, then mental affliction takes over.
对了，我对了，他反正我那做了这个牛毛了，看的家业这个，看的家业的，对了，告诉了他个这8月的电图啊，就马中啊，赢吧赢了，说了吧，那开玩笑嘛的，当不要不要吧，那刚才是独家这个的，这个的忙起这牛毛娘连针这个有了吧？那牛毛娘连针这那干嘛用它？这样后来通过要嘛了吧？那然后要嘛的。
So that when we kind of oppose mental affliction, and we kind of are in that sort of mode where this is our dedicated purpose, then we can't really have to say, we have to have an understanding of just how volatile systems are. That things would start out very good but ultimately end up bad, and that we can have no expectation of kind of a general kind of overall peace and enlightened society unless we have dealt with our own mental affliction.
我对了，他的那什么人家，可干啥呢？牛毛是的，这可这个审计吧，这他可他用还好吧？但那给我一把人呢，牛毛我都觉得没给我抢过来，他等于我就给这么个写吧的嘞，当然被这刚刚全部这给我这给这写上这，那么就对他这个什么给我真的，他可对的用处就真的多，可是我说看的加油嘛了，看的马加吧人呢，可对呢，可见的听我对，牛毛给这个多。 他告诉我，他对对，见家人的见态度，牛毛马给把这个人上山真的，或者告诉他，这地的这个都公布的哇，公布的哇，可见的这样的，咱讲牛毛见的，他多家人的用这个多，可是你说同样的，山上巴罗人把那他旁边的不会巴拉人把那他用到蒙古就用的，这个牛毛不用了哇，他说在我也不用的，因为牛毛讲我都，在我搞完对我，在我对个没吧。
So really, we must oppose mental affliction. We must become accustomed to the opposing of mental affliction, the reducing of the influence and power of mental affliction to the ultimate eradication of mental affliction, because otherwise, it will only be a case of no happiness for us. Mental affliction, when it's present, can never be a source of happiness, and that it kind of like it's like in situations where we've had so many instances of this, I've mentioned it so many times, that we're on friendly relations with somebody else, and then just due to whatever we have said, something said that can change the whole tone of our relationship with that person, and leading to unhappiness, and so kind of like we must understand that if we haven't got a kind of a handle on our mental affliction, aren't mindful and alert to the arising of mental affliction, then we are kind of at the mercy of conditions, because then when certain conditions are met, then automatically mental affliction is going to arise. And so we therefore have to have kind of like a preparation in the mind, habituation in the mind to the opposite of whatever will sustain a mental affliction. And we can see how mental affliction is so prevalent even in news stories. We can see how in relationships, in families, in societies, again, how where a certain conflict is reported, it's all down to the arising of mental affliction, actions born out of mental affliction. It's there for us every evening on the news report.
News
So in fact, news is like the ultimate demonstration of all that is mentally afflicted, really. Otherwise, it's not news.
What did it? That is the Kansa, woman, the Kansa to the Baribata, Kansa, Korana, Ninja, no more like your dog. No more did that. No more Kichigua, Kansa Korala, no good, shell and no good one. Shell and no good, no more on Kichigua, what the Kansa Ninja, no more like you and Ted and Rangi no more Panta and shaking no more. And it's a Payella, and it's because of 20 chapter, what did it?
Except that in the news, they often don't make the distinction between the person and the person being under the influence of mental affliction. And that's the distinction that we must always hold. It's not the person who is bad, it's the mental affliction that is at fault here. And so, we must make that distinction, that we oppose the mental affliction, we have compassion for the person.
Social Nyomunge, Tunjanga, Mangacha, Nebuta Madonna, and same to the young take it to Pena Penjo, and Cosa, Tunjanga, Kaze, Yabu, you call Chida, Tunja, Yabu, in a and social Nyomo, Nebuta Mona, Yomo Gay, Julia, Mount Chimarwa, and Dilatena, Sem Majiva, should share the same. Single to make sure that you won't take it one. Single to make sure that you won't take it one. What did it?
So we can see here that when we have we kind of like within the or amongst the conditions for mental affliction without any application of antidote, then that is only kind of feeding mental affliction in our minds, and that in say, even situations where people are pursuing wealth acquisition, and we can see that they consider these things to be good and so on. But if they are motivated by mental affliction all the time and doing nothing to oppose that mental affliction, then that is like only guaranteeing an increase of mental suffering along with that, because they will be unease in their minds.
What did it? That Niva Lula Novacha was Sambala, similar Novacha, some Takaja Pabe Nemado, Yonguda Takaja, no more singing gets out and the same sheet network you go about it, because no more get on to, and the Koda Nimago, Kalala drama, what child was so much in the Yonti Yorba. So much in the Yonti Yorba. What did it? Niva Lula Novacha, somebody, Zawale, Koya Sumen Yasoso. Suje Shema Juba, Tetane, 게데 로네 차베 자와나 내나 달라 대화 갈라 요차.
So that like we talked about, mental affliction. So just to be absolutely clear, that there can be no peace of mind when one is under the influence of mental affliction. That it's kind of like it is that which kind of is the opposite of peace of mind. That and it can affect one's sleep, it can affect one's appetite, as we said. It just kind of leads to a general unease and outright feeling of suffering in the mind. And so that's why we say with mental affliction, there can really harm our mental attitude, mentality. The second outline in that set is that it can also harm the body, and it causes there, and we have to reflect on that. Verse number 35 looks at this point. And how shall I ever have happiness if in a net of attachment within my mind there dwell the guardians of the prison of cyclic existence, these disturbing conceptions that become my butchers and tormentors in hell?
녀모디 아니 다 녀모디 온게 레냐바사 레오모 녀바사네 아니 저 아니 코에 동네 나서 녀한테 용부로다 아니 코에 저래 숭마자바다 답변을 저래 숭마자바데나 타마 좀 맞잖아 아니 저거다 루구동에 나서 녀한테 제 루구동에나 저 앞에나 다다 코로나 와이러스 세 당어도 록다운 자 록다운 맞아 나서 그거서 가서 르르 누구 열봐 Lula Nuga, Tanda Lute, the Nigga Lute, Nomo Ongi Yorwa. Nomo Ongi, and Reta, China, because of the Kene Shamala Tenant, to me, Lute, Tony Yamu to the Rete, Yinea, dear, Takaja, Mama, she did Nomo Ongi. Nomo Ongi, Tanzim Maribe, and the Casota, she didn't you take your. She didn't you take a 10 day by yourself, called Lulan, Ranching it. 사전 여월에 풍부지 인사배 잘고 내용부터 내용부터 아니 다가니 지금 어디다 거기서 저 마세 아니 냐와라 소베다 냐와다 이다도 두둘라 소베다 류데디 라디 땡게니 두게 나서 와지 류용도거든 소바 좋은 제바다 아니 그 류소 텐다 랑게 류다 소 텐네 아니 쇠바 제바 다 랑게 뇨모 온게 아니 레사 레디 온게다 동에 대단요시 아니 제베서 샤마주마 대단해서 개대 다게 로라 내바이나 대대 녀모 내바이 내는 차과대 스타가 마대와제 내바이나 내바이나 다게 류셈라 대외 고급 갈래요다 소소 류라 문에 단에 땡큐 그 디지트 가와요서 요 말했어 매도 샤마오자
So to be absolutely clear, that mental affliction leads to the accumulation of a negative karmic imprints that can only therefore thereafter arise in the form of suffering. And so in all instances, so even like we talk about the coronavirus and all the issues of lockdown at the moment, that the coronavirus harms the body, but the body is that which has arisen from mental affliction in itself. We talk about the grasping and true existence of a self-entity, that ignorance, kind of propelling us into this human body existence, that it is a set of contaminated aggregates. And so therefore, it's always going to be prone to virus, pandemic, and whatever else. And so mental affliction is therefore at the heart of all of that suffering caused by coronavirus as well. And that, all of the whole panacea of the lower realms is there as a result of mental affliction, be it the harm in the hells or the hungry spirits or the animal realms. It's all about the harm that it comes about due to mental affliction.
당연히 좀 거기서 나랑 저게 사제가 류디 아니 다 개발도 구발라서 나발라서 동네 나서 준 것도 같아요. 너무 온게 nyomo ongo yong de yorwa nyomo ongo lesane ane de nyongo e chana tama chidro e kanga yong de to ane daga nyomo chetela chachada chedi nyomo di onge society jaba tawata ane society jaba de yong de to rangi lulu nyoba yong de to ta kanja da nyomo ke sawachara rangi 다 내가 다도 가와삼로 따와 있네. 아니 모두는 안다 너가 루셈니를 너가 제대 그랬어. 아니 디 온게다 녀모는 녀부 때는 거지 마주와 이나. 아니 디 모두는 내 대체. 아니 타의 국가 매대가 좋은 데도 와.
And so therefore, that as it talks about here, that it's mental affliction that has led into this kind of prison of cyclic existence, to say. But not only that, but that in the hell realms, that in the depths of hell, that it is that which gives rise to those guardians of hell. It is that which separates us from our body, the life, and it's the tormentors and the butchers of hell cause us to again die in hell and so on. So it's kind of like all of this is a manifestation of the result of mental affliction. And so it's because we've allowed mental affliction to arise that even in this kind of life, that this birth of a contaminated aggregates of body is due to mental affliction. The very occasion of birth, old age, sickness, and ultimately death, it comes about due to mental affliction. And so all of these kind of key issues of life are caused by mental affliction. Even in this life, we may kind of forsake this life through suicide, but that's caused again by mental affliction, where we engage in this harm to the body, thinking that we're getting over some kind of suffering due to mental affliction. So it's kind of like mental affliction, when it has arisen, can only lead to either or and the temporary and ultimate harm to us. And it's kind of like it's that which is harmful to mind and body. And without any application of the antidote, it would continually stay like that. And there can be no liberation for us. So that when we feel, we have this sense of a close relationship with our mental affliction, that we consider these aspects of our thinking to be so important, and something precious, something that we identify closely with, you can see how it will only lead to problems for ourselves, that whenever we're always going to kind of be unhappy in our mind because of that. And so kind of like we must find a way in which we can somehow reduce the level of unhappiness that mental afflictions cause.
아니 하던도 가서 되베 디기라 아니 객지게 쏘 아니 랑귤라 산제 리요데 릭데 세마주게 아니 저기 타바다 탐제 캠에 객자와 맞서 지가 다가 원도 디기래 객지게 아니 체데 디기래 객지게 강가 가려서 녀몬들했다 녀몬 되면도 신 수카 말이야 다 디이마도 못해베 토네 딱 문에 전에 지 가서래 랑라 니버지 여바 이나 아니 다디 아니 마게바 가서 게바데 슉충도 슉충한테 매버 쏟아를 배주제 아니 마게바데 가서 게매바데 마게바 탑시체 게바데 슉충도 다 슉충하다 매버 소에 탑시체다 나라도다 가소래다 링게 쪼데 차대라 다 링게 쪼데 오늘 디기 되게 지마이나
So therefore, kind of must identify first of all the kind of like full extent of the harm caused by mental affliction. That it is kind of like it is that which is kind of with us, causing not just the harm of the suffering of birth and leading to death, but everything in between that we find unpleasant, unpalatable in our lives. It is the main obstacle to us experiencing any happiness. It's the main obstacle to our being able to attain a future fortunate rebirth. It is the main obstacle to our going on to attain liberation or the omniscient state of enlightenment. And so we must find something, therefore, to be able to deal in any way with that which is most harmful in our lives, in all our lives. That to be able to somehow find a means by which we can reduce the influence of mental affliction over our lives. That even better, to eradicate completely the influence of mental affliction over our lives. That means that we find means, really concrete means that, if we kind of if the mental affliction has arisen or is about to arise, that we become aware and we can apply something, a mental way of thinking, an antidote to prevent it from arising. And if it hasn't yet arisen, we are again engaging in kind of like our own propaganda against a mental affliction, to not give it a doorway, not give it an opening at all. And so it's kind of like we must do something to kind of like make this our primary commitment in life.
Because none of the time has like that. I didn't do any man. That time when I was a time, that was a nyomontre.
So some people, very happy to proclaim that they have no enemies. And so they're very self-satisfied in that sense. But yes, you do have an enemy, and the enemy is your mental affliction, and it's about time you did something about it.
We
all have one enemy, and that is our mental afflictions.
Loi top geba nesa zawale. Dede Geshe daje jade ngosumto ngebar majum desi dadir zömido. Reshi neje chungulaya tojoba. Ngaje donam dema joba nimeyong.
So therefore, having identified mental affliction as the enemy, then what is it that we need to do to eradicate this enemy? So the third of the main outlines says, therefore, in order to destroy mental affliction, we need to generate a powerful state of mind. And so from the root text, it starts to describe this powerful state of mind, which says, therefore, as long as this enemy is not slain with certainty before my very eyes, I shall never give up exerting myself towards that end. Having become angry at someone who caused only slight and short-lived harm, self-important people will not sleep until their enemy is overcome.
다 니아버 마초바 데시도 다 간제 코 자원에 매바 소마소바 데시도 아니 다 겨와 데르서 소소기 다 겨와 데르 녀몽 좀바 좀바 깨지 잠에도 다 녀몽 좀베 좀바티 아니 가서다다 디 좀바테 깨지 잠 미도와라 아니 미도와 땡고 그랬어 그러다 디다 소소 룡아 예수고 니와 차상 아니 녀몽 좀에게 토라 아니 다 무슨 주스네 다 배주 땅고 그랬을 때 맞자대서 때마 제고 그랬어 가서나 나라도 다디 가서다다 사람들 차라고도 잘해도 랑기 디기 탐제 좀을 지금도 세디 디기 치매 디기 아니 뭐도 디기 다다 지가서라다 간자 지금 타바다 탐제 치매 바기 디기 탐제 좀을 지금도 수직에서 녀모데 지기도 다 녀모데 맞좀 데시도 먼저 문에 끼바지 차이면도 차이 매반이다. 다 가서 소소를 배주 누바디게 차상제 다디 가서다 좀 깨지 좀 미도 왔잖아. 다 미도 와 엔때바 자고 그랬어.
So here, saying, the beginning of this kind of attitude of opposition to a mental affliction, because we see how destructive mental affliction has been, is being, and will be. And so it's saying here, as long as I haven't, as it says in the verse, like really, clearly destroyed this enemy of the mental affliction, as long as I can't verify that I have done that, therefore I will not even for 1 minute give up with my objective of overcoming mental affliction totally and utterly. So it's kind of like a vow, really, a very powerful kind of vow that one makes, because once one has understood how destructive mental affliction has been to body, speech, mind, how it has destroyed our happiness in this life, will destroy happiness in future lives, will destroy possibility of attaining liberation or the omniscient state of enlightenment, and it's all at the kind of like the point of identifying, outing mental affliction here as this really intractable enemy that really must be utterly eradicated.
Pena chashavana jigdena and the Reshi Nova Chig, the Neka with Nova Chungu and it 6 was a Mawalaya, social Chikaso, the 6 to judge Shagan Laya, Tigner Tony, Conto Tigner Son, Troy Jue, and Kunzi as a Najet Dosata, and the Choma won the San of Tani, and it did shook Chetatani. Rotaka Nova Chetatani, Toanam. Jati Majumbato, that's also like the legend of Colin Nova Yapuchi Marevo, Nimo. But the Tomachic was Tomachetic was what it is. And Taganisha Penagazo Zamulina, I gave up down, take the Calteta, Lakjata, Sunjapet, she was Sonata, Kadijada, Sosutala Kadija in Yorba. And it gave up the Casole, Takanchik Casole, and the taxpayer money cigarette. Ganga such a new watchable in the unit. Miss Kale Jab Yogi, and Mrs. Kale Jab Yogi takes Ganga, and it's just Palm Sir. That Laxa Sun, the Takanja, Jala Jabi in Skiorata. Then they better check your title of Toson, shoot on the Jaga, we patch out title of Tanti Yorba. Then they check and no more, they talk at the dry sword. That teacher, the top is a guardian check Maris. 배주 갈전 제고 말했어. 근데 이마에서 너무 쇼베 체도 안 좁아지고 다디 제바이는 고쳐 가지고 그래. 샤바디 다디 그 내가 다디 아니 그 년에 차시그데 어디를 저 왔다 어디래. 아니 이내 디체도 다 조선 시우 땅 거 열어 봐. 조선 시우 땅 거 열어 봐. 이내 땅 알아서 다 쪼줄라 가야 도나 지금 요 말 봐. 다들 내 인상 당문에 전에 저는 요모 좀 발라. 당문에 전에 쇼베 체도 좀봐 좀베 안저 닦아줘도 다 가서다 녀모 숑리베서 다 가자다 어제 다 가자 녀모 숑바 라다 지체 다 녀모 다 되네 이거서 뭐서 다이 소와도 녀모 이봐 뭐 쳐서 다 뭐쳐봐 이봐 있어 아니 녀모 숑바라 나 가르치네 다 지체 안 배워 가르쳐 다 배수 지금 말했어 지금 있어
So then one is given the example of the, the in the worldly sense that if one person should insult another, just using some harsh words, and that's kind of considered as a kind of a minor incident. Yet, if the other person is kind of like very arrogant, they will take that to heart and kind of like really nurse that anger deep down and reflect on it from many points of view. And so therefore, increase the fire of revenge in their minds. They kind of, as it says in the verse here, they will not sleep until that perceived enemy is overcome. And I'm saying, if there are people like that who kind of are so dedicated and kind of single pointed about getting their revenge, and then why isn't it that I'm not making an effort to overcome my mental afflictions? I need to really recommit to really opposing and eradicating mental afflictions. And we can see how this example too plays out in the world, isn't it? About nations kind of like who really very quickly and very kind of really solidly identify this kind of concrete enemy that must be overcome. And then when must take revenge for any perceived harm and so on, and therefore the kind of the wealth of that country, the taxes and so on are kind of funneled to create weapons, to create missiles, to create bombs and so on in the course of propagating this or kind of fulfilling this sense of revenge. And that there's no sense of it being an enemy that could possibly due to some sort of negotiation or another way, aid or whatever, become a friend, but rather we kind of have would rather bankrupt the country in seeking revenge in this way. So they're kind of like looking at something way out of proportion to the harm that has been done, and yet they're so dedicated to gaining satisfaction at destroying such an enemy. We need to borrow that kind of attitude to focus on overcoming and destroying our internal enemy of mental affliction.
What the Imba Insa, then the Imba Insa, that Tame da Jomelaya, and the Missy Chasan Lutang Yorba. And Missy Chasan Lutang, and a bad Takaja Jugosa Ju, and the Casora Takaja, the Casora Takaja, Migo saw was a saw learning. Takaja, the Chiguyana, Tanyomo were Talata, and it ties all the day. And the Shabbat no young Yomo don't that the Saw Yomo Jomel, Peso Garchin Checo Maris, or what? Peso Garchin Checo Maris.
So kind of saying, in a situation like these kind of wars and conflicts, that there are so many who are willing to dedicate their lives, to give up their lives in order to overcome the perceived enemy. And so, and yet, we have identified mental affliction as the main enemy. So why aren't I making more of an effort to overcome this enemy?
Tamega Tabo, Mother sayings she would chigger the Tabo Meva Soton, Cosena Masala, you might never chagres. Could never chatugres. When you might she do. Oh, yes, Seba is Tabo teacher Seba as a Kolikai, the hero cigarette, and call it chicken. In a young, Cosena Masana, when you might she do this. And Yabu Samatana, and Ross ever saw the rest. 다 이제 다 문제 전에 갑자기 작아서 너무 잡아들었어. 거다 말아서 매번 모속을 봐도 매번 차고요 말이야. 매번 차고 막 탐해가 잡아도 소소 매번 마셔는 남신 매번 차주고 와. 매번 차주고 와. 어디다
Again from a future verse in the Bodhisattva's way of life, where Master Shantideva points out, these are types who kind of lay glory over the killing of their enemy and consider themselves some kind of hero. But Master Shantideva points out, well, whether you kill them or not, they're going to die anyway. So basically, you've killed just a corpse. That would match you better to actually look inside and start, destroying and overcoming and killing your internal mental afflictions, your internal enemies. Because otherwise, whoever your enemy is, one of you is going to die at first anyway, at some stage.
나 너무도 소소가 년부 때는 매번 마소고 봐도 매번 좀 작으면 돼. 사람은 봐도 용 되기도 와.
And if you don't apply antidotes to the mental afflictions, they will not be overcome, and they will, from life to life to life to life to life, cause us misery and harm.
어디 용 되기도 어디 되래 다 저서 어디다가 이제 랑기 되게 너무 어견 되게 차사 시 아니 다가는 이제 알아서 탐해와게 아니 잘라 갑자기 짜단데서 삼로스탄 뒤돌아 아니 뒤주 가자 당고를 조선 가자 당고요래 아니 근데 지기요래 어떻게 삼로스탄 아니 너무 근려밖에 와다 다다 탐해와 다 너밖에 와니 됐다 그 시우리 개바 전부래 어다 되게 그 삼로탄도 아니 다나 탐해와 다대 너무라 때는 연구여자다 너무 매봐서나 내가 매봐 자주고도 봐. 내가 매봐 자주고도 다 내가 가서 오호 땅 먼저 락바 창사 넣으샤. 락바 창사데 녀몽을 샤스. 먼저 갑대 자사 넣으샤. 갑대 자사 녀몽을 샤스. 어디다 삼로 들려고도 와.
So again to reflect on all the faults of mental affliction. And to think about even like the enemies that we've had in our lives, the ordinary, common enemy, and that all the time and expense maybe that we have expended over trying to get one over on our enemy or overcome our enemy, and that but the real harm, if you compare the harm that has come from that enemy versus the harm that has come from your mental affliction, you can see there's no comparison. That the mental afflictions are the source of 99.99% of all harm that ever comes, and that kind of like if we overcome our mental affliction, then we've overcome our ordinary common enemy anyway. And so it's kind of like we've overcome all enemies by overcoming our mental affliction. So we kind of have to kind of wake up to where, what to really focus on, kind of like say, oh, I've been really kind of focusing on the wrong thing. The common enemy is not the issue here. The issue is really to focus on overcoming my mental affliction. And so that's where I'm going to put all my energies and concentration now.
근데 가서데 노모라 갑대 자와라 아니 남주 고고요래 셰럽 고고요래 뭐유그 내수 신고고요래 어디래면도 조선 가야요 말이 다 탐에 잡을라 갑대 자와라 조선 요래 타마 소소 쏠래 년가 요래 노모다 갑대 자와라 쏠래 년가 요 말이 조선 요 말이 아니 가르고서 남주 고고요래 아니 뭐유그 내수 신고고요래 디심바이나 미수야 제토에치 포모 켜봐 요 말이 아니 가서데 리기 켜봐 요 말이 미 남주 여바이나 미 임바이나 수인의 제투에치.
So to also look at the kind of like otherwise other advantages of really focusing and concentrating on overcoming the mental afflictions, of opposing the mental afflictions. It requires dedication, it requires intelligence, and it requires a kind of an understanding of the actuality of things. But what it doesn't require is expense. It doesn't require, like, you know, in your opposition to your kind of your worldly enemy, it may cost you a lot of money to kind of oppose them. It may even be a danger to you. You might be harmed or you might be killed by them. There's no such danger in the work of opposing your mental afflictions. It doesn't matter who you are, how rich you are, how poor you are, what race you are, what gender you are. As long as you're human beings, you can overcome and oppose your mental affliction. And so it is there for us. We have all of what we need in order to be able to do this.
남주도 그거요 뭐도 certificate 거야 말 degree 거야 말에 modern education 거야 말에 갖고 말에
So it's great. We have all the necessary conducive conditions. We don't need any certificates or degrees or modern education, even to oppose the mental afflictions.
어디래? 아니 뭐 녀모라 갑자기 맞잖아. certificate 같이 전부 있네. PhD다 갈 doctor다 갈이네 뱅 말에 동네 요래.
And likewise, if we don't oppose the mental affliction, then all these kind of educational certificates and degrees and masters, etc., are of no benefit to us anyway, because we're not opposing the mental afflictions.
Okay, 페마레, 그게 페마레. 아니, 전부리나 규칙주의네 팽거 말에, 전부리나 릭토주의네 팽거 말에, 전부리가 끼에 강가신교네 팽거 말에, 기분 요 말에.
And so even if you're the richest person on the planet, the most educated person on the planet, the most powerful person on the planet, if you're not opposing your mental afflictions, you're not going to be a happy person anyway.
What is it? That is that 간제 저기 녀몽 쓰는데 다 못 쳐봤잖아요. 아니 저 다수이 맞어. 얘다 녀몽이 쓰겠다. 얘다 녀몽이 쓰겠지. 뭐였다. 어디래?
And so that means that, you know, you need to constantly, repeatedly recognize the mental afflictions as your enemy. You say, yes, it's the mental afflictions that are my enemy. It's the mental afflictions that are my enemy.
다가는서 소소 마기바 차와다가 내 다코인 피스 말도 피 깨져 마기바 속에 랑이 영웅이 받은 것도 나를 봐. 너 찔려 받은 말에 나를 봐.
So likewise, when we're feeling unhappiness, it's not that we must get over this attitude of pointing outwards and say, so these are the causes, these are the causes of that person, or this issue is the cause of it, but rather to start looking inwards and saying, it's the mental afflictions that have given rise to this sense of unease and unhappiness and discontent. This is the mental afflictions, not anything to do with outside.
마기바 속에 소소 나라요. 소소 녀모와디 아니 마기바 쇠와라. 마기바 쇠와라. 다기 라바네샤 미치게 칙두자 시아바당 아니 가소래 다 간제 가리 소소라 지금 여바지 개와이나 디 소소 마기바 차에디 소소게 칙 야고지 되고 여바 인자 칙 야고라 착바 인자 디 마종데 아니 마기바 차기도 와. 아니 칙 야고지 라비엘라 착바 인자 디 아니 차고도 와. 디 차기도 와. 다디 이제 소소 나네 아니 삼로 땅다 지게 아니 녀몽 디 온기 아니 마기바 차기도 와. 다디 뭐서 냐바도 못 쳐봤잖아.
We have to gain a very kind of a subtle expertise at recognizing the mental affliction as the cause, that which initiates a sense of unhappiness and discontent. And so we say it's an internal matter. And, you know, somebody might be engaging in talking to us in a negative way or even harming us. But that is not the cause of our unhappiness. The cause of our unhappiness is that we have expected the opposite of that they would use a good kind of complimentary language towards us and benefit us. And so this is the opposite has happened. Therefore, it's allowed the mental affliction aspect of our thinking to become foremost in our minds, and therefore to kind of say, okay, this is going to be unhappiness. So it's kind of like the mental affliction is the one has initiated the discontent and unhappiness, not the negative words or the harm coming from outside.
현지적인 소리다 지금 요래. 그 게임 지금 요래부터 유소도 소소 너무 겨서 막이 버잖아. 너무 그 저버 못들.
So the most that that external harm can be is a cooperative condition. The substantial cause is also for our discontent is the mental afflictive mindset within us. So let's leave it there for today.
Yeah, that namjun shi chen rang de de la ta ka je tab je la tu ji什么都把下je都把set到的ta ka je这让个这的快乐ta ka je快乐也把主业中三路当业中就三路当呢他可以第一肯定是就把那样ta ka je这个告诉了他懂那个垃圾一把去或者也把主业中真的也别落地啊让给就了那干嘛当嘛就把就说三十钱아니 되네 친한 거 초콜릿 줘봐 이번 이나야 아니 유대는 줘봐 두자 여봐 말이야 뭐 또 팔다 잠대서 공부하시 아니 어떤 데그 로디 아니 님의经过去了就说说的地点아니 되네 또 같이 저 심지 탐제기도 아니 산제 공부하지 마다는 탐도 요한이도 토와 지기 삼살로지 삼다 아니 되네 그 둠바디 아니 다외经过 약한就说삼살디 답변마다 님만 다외도 어떻게 삼다 아니 되네 반대서 라마를 보자 다게 주어도 가지고 구소도 좀 모두 써도 되는 소리 저 답변 가서 배 니베 가서 주 스베 가서 텐션 산제 고마마도 뭐도 제도 소소서 뭐시
So let us bring our minds to the figure that we are visualizing in front, the figure of Shakyamuni Buddha, and begin the process of inviting and preparing a seat for him on our crown. And to do this, we reflect on renunciation at the outset, thinking of the status of cyclic existence, the nature of cyclic existence, that any even happiness I experience within cyclic existence is inevitably going to turn to suffering because it is in the nature of suffering. And from this we develop this desire to gain a definite emergence from cyclic existence. This renunciation which arises in the form of a lotus mandala seat on our crown. And then to reflect on the all inner and outer phenomena, lacking any objective existence, but merely being imputed by thought, being the reality of life, and from that manifests the sun disk mandala seat. And that all so the desire to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings gives rise to the moon disk mandala seat, thereby creating a suitable seat for the Buddha. Then we begin the invocation verse: "O glorious and precious Guru, come take your lotus and moon seat placed there on my crown. Keep me safe in your kindness. Bestow on me the attainments of body, speech, and mind." This is recited 3 times. At the end of the first, the figure moves from the space in front. At the end of the second, arrives at our pre-prepared seat. And at the end of the third, we have the certainty that the Buddha will remain until we ourselves attain the state of enlightenment that we can rejoice in.
다기네시 삼로다 아니 년종지 삼로다 아니 된데 년종 삼문게 로디 아랑니 디페마 답제질 교수 선서차 되네 지나가 추가 유전도 뜨자 요마 산로 코다 초바지 봤어도 아니 된데게 가자 가상예베 로다가라 아니 님의 기본 약화지 교수스 빼매도 되네 다 심지 탐제도 산제 고만 요원도 마다 토바 지기 선서 로직게 안 된데게 로데 둠바디 아니 다위지 뭐냐 가지고 아니 받아서 라모를 보지 다위 인가 빼면서 가르치면 거를 줘서 제수 손도서 소화되는 지금 손대잖아 담배 가서 다라게 집어내 맞죠 아니 배가서 수배 가서 때도 쉬나 산재 고마 마도 모두 제수 소소 서서 고마시 안테네 까마다 맞자와 마 인데스 마 카츠네 남준닝네 단내 신이 안디가다 도제 가고 짱가 봐 체가제 가게 아니 뒤에 타고도 아니 또 배짱아 다이도 무는 마음을 다이도 무는 마음을 소화스데 같이 거기스데 제주 잡아야 거 순간 알아봐서 나 뒤뒤 알아봐서 나 뒤뒤 알아봐서 나 뒤뒤는 텐데가 오비 예다마 해도 다다는 뭐 샤만에 소화 어떻게 이 같이 순간 거기스데 지고 봐시.
And so at this point, then we can offer the 7-limbed practice and the mandala in the process of accumulating virtue and purifying negativities. And then again, we begin to reflect on the creation of a suitable seat at our heart center where the Buddha can come. Again, by reflecting on renunciation, the nature of cyclic existence being in the nature of suffering, wanting to gain a definite emergence from that suffering, spontaneously producing the mandala, the lotus seed mandala, and that all inner and outer phenomena lack any objective existence, reaching that point of the mere absence of the object of negation, single-pointedly meditating there from which arises the sun disk mandala seed. And likewise, the strong, exalted intention of wanting ourselves to attain the state of enlightenment quickly in order to benefit all sentient beings, giving rise to the moon disk mandala seed. And then again, we recite the invocation verse, inviting the Guru Buddha who's on our crown down to the pre-prepared seat at our heart center. O glorious and precious Guru, come take your lotus and moon seat placed here at my heart. Keep me safe in your kindness. Bestow on me the attainments of body, speech, and mind. Again, this is recited thrice. At the end of the first, the figure at our crown moves down through the crown chakra down into the central channel. At the end of the second, arrives at our pre-prepared seat, and at the end of the third, we have the certainty that they will remain there until we attain the state of enlightenment. We can rejoice in that, just as the petals of the lotus now arise and fold over and meet and are joined at their tips by a 5-pronged semi-vajra, white in color, and that seals it. This is encircled then by the name mantra of Shakyamuni Buddha, going in a clockwise direction around the mantra of Manjushri in an anti-clockwise direction, and the mantra of dependent arising again in a clockwise direction.
아니 랑게 가서 닝게 위에서 아니 라마 투베 공부 다 세자 용서 받지 왔다들 수요 서자디 아니 가서데 다다 가서도 고송 돌에 왜세 빠도 매버터 랑게 지원에 간디 발라 아니 왜세 트네 아니 랑게 딱까지 통하면 왔을 때 버터 켜봐도 아니 지금 소아지와 마진발라 미상아지와 주인차마 최종가 제낙선에서 로달라 수가다 미게 주봉도 추정 세대한 생각만 통만 매번 사베다 되게 추정마소에 내가 근데지 중앙에 맞장시 다 중서 다가는 지금 소다가 또 받아 가와 장주스면 라바다 가와 상하게 단지다 가와 파다마다 먹어봐다 제보다 로벨라 먹어봐다 더 상바 수바자 먹어봐다 구조스면 레벨 내게 받아 담배 취업하다 밥에 준대로 고하다 받아 샘제는 레벨 내게 받아 등감이 다 기와다 신기와다 기도 저와 신기와라 제수이라고 도나 토리도 탑에 계속 고하니 고하다 예수 예동 소지제 받아 아니 장시 다 받 중수 서로 어디네 고마시
So again, from here, then from within the package of the lotus leaves, the Guru Manindra Buddha sends out countless rays of light from the heart center, permeating the lotus petals, going out and permeating through every cell of our bodies, from the crown of the head to the soles of the feet, and engaging in the purification of all negativities we have accumulated since beginning this time, such as the 10 infractions of the 10, the ethical conduct of refraining from the 10 non-virtues, such as killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, harsh speech, divisive speech, pointless and idle gossip, covetousness, malicious intent, and wrong view. And also any of these negativities that we have engaged in this life, in past lives, in previous lives, in all lives since beginning this time, any infractions of the 3 sets of vows, the Pratimoksha vows, the Bodhisattva vows, and the Tantric vows, showing disrespect to our teachers, parents, forsaking the Dharma, any of the naturally occurring negativities, or any of those that have been proscribed by the Buddha, any negativities that we have done ourselves, that we have forced others to do, or getting others to do, or rejoiced in the doing of. In short, any kind of negativity whatsoever that we have engaged in, we feel that it's completely and utterly purified.
다가는 최주배 개념 안에 루기 나자 가리여 봐있네. 생그 동네 가리여 봐있네. 다가는 중심 코만요 봐. 살롱 틸레 다. 다가는 안에 가서다 작가저 가서도 최주배 개념 다 치슈데 담에게 나셔 이러면서 담에게 나셔 교 탑제 장 가나 다자 다발하면서 바지 차도가 야고 시중수 쓰고 마셔.
Likewise, any obstacles to our practice, be it a physical illness or mental illness of any kind whatsoever, that all these have been purified. Any imbalances within the channels, winds and drops, or the 4 elements within the bodies, body and mind, and particularly kind of like curing of this ordinary view, that is one of the main obstacles to our quickly being able to attain enlightenment. Whereby we ditch that ordinary view to being able to have pure view in all aspects.
어디를 공부하셔? 아니 되네. 다 소소 신도 저거 롱디 내랭게체. 라마샤자스가 꾸들 해지 지게체는 아니 소소게 아니 가서 루이데 라마샤자스가 꾸를 교수 삼성 공부하셔. 다 소소 신도 저거 셈데 내랭체 라마샤자스가 꾸들 해지 지게체는 소소 셈데 라마샤자스가 꾸를 교수 삼성 공부하셔. 되네 랑게 룽아 예수다 라마샤자스가 고송도 뭐 예매 교수 삼사차. 아니 디 대화데 대외 동바데 대동니스모 이시 교수 삼사차. 아니 랑게 내사게 내디야 아니 내기 교회 탐제 되네. 아니 라마샤자스가 다베 시도 교수 서서부터 공부하셔.
And then through the combination of the body of the Buddha acting as the cooperative conditions, and my own most subtle wind acting as the substantial cause, my own body is transformed into the enlightened body of Buddha. And then through the combination of my own most subtle mind acting as the substantial cause, together with the mind of Buddha acting as the cooperative conditions, my own mind is transformed into the enlightened mind of a Buddha. And so my body, speech, and mind now are inseparable from the body, speech, and mind of the Buddha. This brings forth a sense of bliss, which combines with voidness, and I abide in the wisdom of non-dual bliss and voidness. The place that I am in also is completely transformed of all fault, and becomes the perfect celestial abode of an enlightened being.
다른 라마샤자스가 구수도 뭐 예매 좋아데 나라 라시 메겐 고바셰 아니 디 투갈레 도바샤자 도바 빠도메 봐 쩨니 아니 감속에 신제 탐젤라 포알라 슈발라 때네 아니 대다 단제장 아니 라마샤자스가 구수도 뭐 예매 좋소 서서 대다 내사게 아니 베 감속에 내 대다 단제장 아니 라마샤자스가 다베시도 좋소 서서 아니 다간제 감속 코아데 베 동네
And so, likewise, then, seeing myself to be the non-inherent, existent, fully enlightened being, sending out light rays from my own heart center, equal in number to all the sentient beings in all the 3 realms of existence, and then on touching them, these light rays completely transform them, eradicate all fault and imperfection, and they arise as fully enlightened beings. That the places that they are in also are eradicated, they kind of all fault and imperfections are eradicated, and they become pure realms, Buddha realms, and that all the three realms of existence become empty. Again, I can rejoice here, feel great happiness at having today led all sentient beings to that state of enlightenment. And that I understand that the leading of all sentient beings to the state of enlightenment, the virtue that has made that possible, myself as the agent of that virtue, all completely empty of adherent existence and merely imputed by thought. This induces bliss, which in turn induces avoidance, and I abide in the wisdom of non-dual bliss and avoidance. So of course I realize I'm operating at the level of imagination here. This is of course to bring this about in reality is not so easy. Yet I want to take a moment to really dedicate very, very consciously and focused in a focused way the virtue, the cause of virtue I have generated towards this objective this morning, and to kind of really dedicate that it may quickly become possible, really become manifest, so that I have all the conducive conditions to make it happen, and all of the inconducive conditions are gone. You are Avalokiteshvara, great treasure of compassion, not aimed at your existence, and Manjushri, master of flawless wisdom, as well as Vajrapani, destroyer of hordes of demons without exception. Samkapa, crown jewel of the sages of the land of snows, Los Anjakpa, at your feet I make request.